Adrian Cross stopped the entire training range when he laughed at her. She stood behind the firing line in a plain uniform, no decorations, no expression, just watching. And Cross decided right there that she was lost, that she was nobody, that she had no business standing anywhere near elite operators. He called her forward in front of everyone specifically to prove it. 60 operators watched. 60 operators laughed with him. Then his commanding officer walked onto that range holding a sealed Navy SEAL personnel file and opened it. The laughing stopped forever. Because the quiet woman nobody had read was the most dangerous operator in that building, and she had been watching all of them from the moment she arrived. Subscribe now, stay until the very end, and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. She signed in at 0617 on a Monday morning before the duty officer had finished his first cup of coffee. No announcement, no escort, no ceremony of any kind. The woman at the front desk looked up, took the offered ID card, ran it through the system, and frowned slightly at the screen, because the clearance level that came back was not what she expected from someone who looked like this. The woman standing across from her was average height, maybe early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a standard bun, and a uniform that had no combat patches, no deployment ribbons, nothing that screamed elite. She had the kind of face that didn't invite questions. Not unfriendly, just settled. Like someone who had already decided everything important a long time ago and didn't need to revisit any of it. Commander Voss, the duty officer, said carefully. Intelligence support, is that right? That's right, Elena said. 6-week evaluation program. You'll be billeted in Officer Housing Building 7. Your workspace is already set up in the observation wing. Thank you. She picked up her bag. One small bag, the kind a person brings for a weekend, and walked in the direction the duty officer pointed. She didn't ask for a guide. She didn't ask where the mess hall was, or where she could get coffee, or what time the first training session began. She already knew all of it. She had studied the layout of Red Harbor Naval Special Warfare Training Center for 11 days before she arrived. The center ran 3 simultaneous evaluation tracks for SEAL candidates and advanced operators. The morning schedule was posted on a board near the main briefing room, and Elena stopped to read it. Not because she needed to, because she wanted to watch who else was reading it at the same time, and how they were reading it, and what they said when they turned away. 2 senior operators walked past, arguing about a Nightland navigation score. A young trainee stood near the water fountain, trying to look like he wasn't listening to them. A chief petty officer with a coffee mug and a clipboard moved through the corridor with the particular walk of someone who had been doing this job long enough to resent it a little, but not enough to leave. Elena noted all of it. She noted the way the argument between the 2 operators ended. One of them laughed and deferred, which meant the hierarchy between them was settled, even if their ranks were equal. She noted the trainee by the water fountain, because anyone that careful at that age was either talented or afraid, and the difference mattered. She noted the chief petty officer, because chiefs ran training centers, whether or not anyone said so officially, and this one had the look of a man who had seen too many short-tenure commanders cycle through to care much about the current one. She filed all of it. Then she found her workspace in the observation wing, set her bag down, opened her laptop, and got to work. The first person to formally notice her was a young lieutenant named Carver. He was 26, Red Harbor's most recent decorated trainee, and he had the particular energy of someone who had been told he was exceptional often enough to believe it without being ruined by it, which was actually a narrow window of self-confidence that Elena found useful. He knocked on her open door on Tuesday afternoon. Commander Voss, I'm Lieutenant Carver. I was told to check if you needed anything for the observation sessions. Elena looked up from her screen. I'm fine, thank you, Lieutenant. He didn't leave, not rudely. He just stood there another moment the way people do when they actually have a question but haven't decided whether to ask it. Elena waited. Can I ask what you're evaluating? He said. Program effectiveness, she said. How the training methodology translates to operational performance metrics. He nodded slowly. Right. Yeah. A pause. Is there anything specific I should be aware of for the evaluation? Elena looked at him directly for the first time. Just keep doing what you're doing, Lieutenant. I'm not here to evaluate individuals. She watched the relief cross his face. She also watched the thing that came after the relief, which was curiosity, the kind that doesn't go away, just because you've been told not to worry. She liked Carver. She decided to remember him. Commander Adrian Cross introduced himself on Wednesday. He didn't knock. I walked into her workspace, the way men who are accustomed to owning rooms walk into rooms, not aggressively exactly, but with the casual certainty that he was entitled to be wherever he chose to be. He was a physical presence. Not just his size, though he was built, the way combat instructors get built over years of genuine conditioning, but the way he occupied space. He took up more room than he needed, and he seemed to know it and consider it an asset. Commander Voss. He didn't offer a hand. He said her name the way you say the name of a thing you are inspecting. Adrian Cross. I run the advanced operator track. I know, Elena said. Commander Cross, your record is impressive. He smiled. It was a particular kind of smile, the one that says, I know my record is impressive, and I'm pleased that you know it, and I'm also slightly surprised that you know it. Intel support, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a category. He was putting her in a box. That's what my assignment says, Elena agreed. You sit in on our sessions. Observation only. I won't interrupt training. He looked around her workspace briefly. The laptop, the notebooks, the nothing else. You came alone, he said. I work better that way. Another pause. He was recalibrating something. She could see it not dramatically. Just the small, quiet adjustment of someone who has encountered something that doesn't quite fit his existing model and is deciding whether that's worth his attention. He decided it wasn't. Let me know if you need anything, he said and left. She watched him go. She had read his file 11 days ago, the same time she had read everyone else's. She knew his career better than he thought anyone could. She knew the operational gaps in his experience. She knew the evaluation he had written 3 years ago that had been quietly buried. She knew the promotion board result that had taken longer than his record warranted, and she knew the reason for the delay, even if Cross did not. She knew considerably more than that, but that was not the kind of information she planned to share on day 3. The observation sessions started Thursday morning. Elena sat in the elevated viewing position above the main training floor with a notebook, a pen, and a coffee that was already cold. Below her, Cross ran his advanced operators through a close-quarter building drill with the crisp, aggressive efficiency of someone who was very good at exactly this. She gave him that. He was genuinely skilled. Whatever else was true about Adrian Cross, the man could teach, and the operators beneath him moved with a precision that reflected real instruction, not just natural ability. She watched, she wrote, she noticed. The drill had 12 operators cycling through 4 rooms in rotating pairs. It was a standard exercise, well designed. But the rotation had a flaw that she had spotted within the first 8 minutes, a structural blind spot in the 3rd room that consistently produced a half-second hesitation in every operator who cycled through regardless of experience level. That hesitation wasn't the operator's fault. It was a design problem. The training environment itself was teaching a bad habit, a fractional pause at the threshold of room 3 that in a live situation could cost a life. She wrote it down. She watched it happen 11 more times. She wrote it down 11 more times. After the drill concluded, Cross gathered his operators for a debrief below. His voice carried up to her clearly. He was sharp, specific, honest in his criticism, and generous with his recognition, not for show, she thought, but because he genuinely respected competence. She added that to her assessment. It wasn't the whole picture of him, but it was real. He looked up at her once during the debrief. She didn't look away. He didn't either for a moment. Then he returned to his operators. The problem with being invisible in a closed environment is that the invisibility becomes its own kind of statement. By the end of the first week, Elena had become a conversation. She heard the edges of it the way she always heard things, not by asking, but by being still and unremarkable in places where people spoke freely. The break area near the main training floor. The corridor outside the officer mess. The equipment staging area, where junior instructors gathered before morning sessions. The version of Elena that was circulating at Red Harbor sounded something like this. She was a paper officer. Someone who had spent her career behind desks and inside secure facilities processing intelligence that other people risked their lives to collect. She had probably never run an operation, probably never taken fire. She had the kind of clearance that came from time served, not merit demonstrated. And her assignment here was one of those politically managed placements that happened when someone needed to appear to be doing something without actually being asked to do anything. She heard 3 variations of this over 5 days. She didn't correct any of them, because that was not what she was here to do. The confrontation happened on Friday afternoon. Cross brought his full advanced operator group to the main range for a live-fire familiarization with a new sidearm system the Navy was evaluating. It was a standard session, but he had invited several observers, which told Elena that he was using it partly as a demonstration of his program's quality. The range was crowded for a training exercise, 12 operators, 4 senior instructors, the armorer, and half a dozen people who had no particular role except to be present. Elena was there too in her standard position, slightly removed, watching. The session ran well for the first 40 minutes. Operators cycled through the familiarization protocol, and Cross moved among them with easy authority, offering corrections that were precise and delivered without condescension. The armorer beside her muttered something approving that she agreed with. Then Cross turned and looked directly at her. "Commander Voss." The voice carried. Everyone on the range heard it. "Since you've been watching our training methods for a week," he said, "I'd be curious to see your assessment from a practical perspective." He gestured at the firing line. "Come show us what intelligence support looks like at the range." She heard the laughter before she processed it completely. Light laughter, uncertain laughter, the kind that comes from a crowd that isn't entirely sure if something is funny, but is taking its cue from the man who seems to think it is. She looked at the faces around her, amused, curious, waiting. She looked at Cross. His expression was pleasant, calm. That was interesting. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even contemptuous exactly. He was performing something a mild public entertainment at her expense, and he was entirely comfortable doing it because he was entirely certain of the outcome. She stood up. "Permission to step forward, Commander." Something shifted in his expression. Barely. She saw it. "By all means," he said. She walked to the firing line. She picked up the evaluation, sidearm checked the chamber, confirmed the magazine settled her grip. She noticed 2 things immediately. The trigger pull on this particular unit was slightly longer than the calibration spec in the evaluation documentation, and the sight picture had been adjusted for right side dominance, which was not her dominant side. She made both adjustments in the time it took to exhale. She fired 12 rounds. 12. The grouping. When the target returned was so tight that 3 of the operators stepped forward involuntarily to look at it. Cross stood very still. "Again?" she asked him. He said nothing for a moment. "No," he said. "That's sufficient." She set the weapon down, stepped back, and returned to her position. The range was quiet in a way it hadn't been before. Cross resumed the session. He was good enough at his job to recover smoothly, and most of the operators took their cue from him and returned their attention to the exercise. But she watched the ones who didn't, the 3 who had stepped forward to look at the target grouping. Carver was one of them. He was looking at her with an expression that had moved well past curiosity into something more careful and attentive. The chief petty officer she had observed on day 1 was another. His expression told her nothing except that he was a man who had learned not to show what he was thinking, which was itself an answer of a kind. The third was an operator named Diaz Staff Sergeant on secondment from a different unit present at Red Harbor for cross-training. He wasn't looking at her at all. He was looking at Cross. She noted it. She went back to her notebook. Cross found her that evening, not in her workspace. Outside it in the corridor as she was returning from the mess hall. The meeting appeared accidental, but she had been at this long enough to understand the architecture of apparently accidental corridor meetings. That was a nice grouping, he said. Thank you. Where did you train? She looked at him. Various places. He held her gaze, searching for something. She gave him nothing to find. You've been running this evaluation for a week, he said. What have you found? I'll submit a formal report at the midpoint. I'm asking informally. I know you are. She paused just long enough to be deliberate. Your program is excellent, Commander. Your operators are well trained. You have one structural problem in the CQB drill room, 3/3 threshold. It's producing a consistent hesitation pattern that your current evaluation metrics aren't capturing. You'll want to look at it. He stared at her. Room 3, he repeated. The sight line from entry to the secondary corner creates a half-second decision gap. It's not the operators, it's the design. I noticed it on Thursday and confirmed it through 12 repetitions by end of session. The silence between them lasted 4 seconds. She counted. Why didn't you say something? He said. I'm saying something now. He studied her. There was something different in his expression. Not respect, not yet, but the forerunner of respect, which is the sudden awareness that you have misjudged the scale of something. Who are you? He said. It was a genuine question, not rhetorical, not performative. He actually wanted to know. I'm intelligence support, Elena said. Assigned to the evaluation program, 6 weeks. She walked past him. Behind her, she heard him stay exactly where he was. Saturday morning, 0530. Elena was already in the observation wing when the duty officer came to find her. He was young, barely 23, and he had the look of someone who had been given a task that made him uncomfortable. Commander Voss, the XO wants to see you. Now. Yes, ma'am? She closed her laptop. The executive officer of Red Harbor was Captain David Marlowe, a man she had read extensively before arriving career naval officer combat tour in Afghanistan, 2 years as an instructor before taking the command position here. Reputation for being thorough, fair, and deeply allergic to political interference in his training programs. She had expected to deal with him eventually. She had not expected it to be 6 days in. She followed the duty officer to Marlowe's office. Marlowe was standing when she arrived. Not a hostile sign. He was the kind of man who stood when people came into his office because sitting felt passive to him. Commander Voss, he said. Sit down. She sat. He looked at a folder on his desk, then at her. I received a flag on your access log this morning, he said. You've pulled from 3 restricted operational archives in the past 4 days. That's correct. These archives are outside the scope of a training evaluation. They are, she agreed. He waited for more. She gave him exactly what was necessary. Captain Marlowe, my assignment as described to you is accurate. I'm supporting the evaluation program, but I have a secondary authorization that runs parallel. I'm not able to discuss its specifics without triggering a reporting requirement that I'd prefer not to trigger yet. He looked at her for a long time. You have a secondary authorization, he said flatly. Yes, sir. From whom? From the office that issues secondary authorizations for personnel in my clearance tier. If you need confirmation, you can call Admiral Haynes at Pacific Operations. He'll verify without detail. Another silence. Marlowe picked up his phone, set it down, picked it up again. If I call Haynes, he said, what will he tell me? That I'm cleared for what I'm doing, that you should let me continue, and that the less you know right now, the cleaner your position will be when this concludes. He sat back. She watched him process this. He was thorough and he was fair, and those two qualities were at war with each other right now. Thorough wanted more information. Fair was reminding him that she had just told him exactly what she was able to tell him. How long, he said. 4 more weeks, maybe less. And Cross? The question surprised her slightly. He had arrived at the right territory faster than she expected. What about him? She said carefully. Is he involved? Elena looked at him steadily. Everyone at Red Harbor is potentially involved, she said. That's why I'm here. Marlowe absorbed this. She watched him accept it not happily, but with the particular resigned intelligence of a man who has enough experience to recognize when he is looking at something larger than himself. "You'll keep my people safe," he said. "Not a question." "I'm here because I didn't keep my people safe 8 years ago," Elena said. "I don't intend to have that experience again." The silence that followed was different from the others. Marlowe looked at her for a long time. Then he closed the folder on his desk. "The archives are available to you," he said. "All of them." She was back in the observation wing by 0710. She opened the archive that mattered most. It was labeled with a date and a mission designation that most of the people at Red Harbor would not recognize. But to Elena, the label was something closer to a scar. Nightfall Echo. Operation File. Classified Special Operations History. She had read parts of this file before, many times. In the years after the mission, when she had access and when she didn't. When she had read the same pages in different contexts and found different meaning in the same words each time. But this was the complete file. The version with the sections that had been restricted even from her. The version with the appendices that no one had told her existed. She began to read. Outside the observation wing window, she could hear the muffled rhythm of morning training, beginning the count of a physical conditioning exercise, the voice of an instructor, the controlled noise of people being pushed toward their limits and finding them. She read. And as she read, 3 things became clear. The first was that the official account of Nightfall Echo was incomplete in ways that were deliberate, not accidental. The second was that the information that had been withheld from her team, the intelligence that had sent them into a situation they were not equipped to survive, had existed before they deployed. Someone had it. Someone had looked at it and made a decision about what to share. The third thing was the thing that turned cold in her chest as she read it. She recognized the decision trail, not the name at the end of it. Not yet. But the pattern, the specific sequence of choices that led from the intelligence existing to the intelligence being withheld, was a pattern she had seen before, in a different context, in a different file. But the same architecture of decision-making. She looked up from the screen. Down below, Cross was walking across the training ground, coffee mug in hand, moving with the easy physical confidence that she had been watching for 6 days. She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked back at the screen. She did not allow herself to reach a conclusion. Not yet. She had been careful for 3 years. She had learned the cost of moving too quickly, and she would not pay it again. But she allowed herself to note what she was seeing. And she began building the case that no one at Red Harbor knew she was building quietly, systematically, the way she had been trained to do everything important. In silence. In patience. In the particular discipline of someone who has already survived the worst thing and will not stop until she knows exactly why. The morning after her meeting with Captain Marlowe, Elena arrived at the observation wing 40 minutes before anyone else. She had not slept well. Not because she was anxious. Anxiety was a luxury she had learned to stop affording herself years ago, but because the file had given her something she hadn't expected. Not a name. Not yet. But a thread she hadn't seen before, running through the decision trail of Nightfall Echo, like a wire buried just beneath the surface, and every time she closed her eyes, she followed it somewhere new. She needed to think, and she thought best when she was watching people. Cross arrived on the training floor at 0615. She watched him from above. He moved with the same physical authority he always did, but she noticed something she hadn't seen in the first week. A slight pause before he addressed his operators. A fractional hesitation at the beginning of his morning brief that hadn't been there before. Almost nothing. The kind of thing that would register as 0 to anyone not specifically trained to read it. He had thought about their corridor conversation. He had thought about it a great deal. Good. She wanted him thinking. Lieutenant Carver appeared beside her at 0632, 2 coffees in hand, and set one on the table next to her without being asked. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. "I wanted to." He sat down a respectful distance away and looked at the training floor below. "Commander Cross seems distracted this morning." "Does he?" "He ran the opening drill twice. He never runs it twice. Carver paused. What did you say to him? Elena picked up the coffee. I gave him a training observation. About room 3. She looked at him. Carver met her gaze steadily. He had the entire CQB course redesigned last night. The maintenance crew was in there until 2200. Chief Holloway told me this morning. He paused again. That's not a normal response to a casual observation. Elena said nothing. I'm not asking to be nosy, Carver said quietly. I'm asking because I've been here 8 months and I've never seen him move that fast on anything structural. He looked at her with the careful, attentive expression she had noticed on day 1. What are you actually doing here, Commander? She studied him for a moment. He held the scrutiny without flinching, which told her what she already suspected, that his instincts were better than his experience, and his experience was already considerable. I'm evaluating the program, she said. Right. He nodded slowly. And if I said I wanted to help, I'd ask why. Because whatever you're looking at, Carver said, I don't think it's the training methodology. The room was quiet for a moment. Below them, Cross began his second iteration of the morning brief, his voice carrying the smooth authority of a man who had recovered his footing. Keep doing your job, Lieutenant, Elena said finally. Exactly as you've been doing it. Don't change anything. Don't talk to anyone about this conversation. She paused. And if you notice something that feels wrong, not tactically wrong, but structurally wrong, the kind of wrong that doesn't have an easy explanation, you come to me directly. Not to Cross, not to the XO, to me. Carver absorbed this. She watched the weight of it settle on him, the particular gravity of being trusted with something larger than yourself before you fully understand its shape. Yes, ma'am, he said. He picked up his coffee and left. She watched Cross below. The thread in the file pulled again. By Wednesday of the second week, Elena had established a pattern that nobody at Red Harbor could quite categorize. She was everywhere and nowhere. She attended training sessions she wasn't scheduled for. She appeared in the equipment staging area at hours that didn't correspond to any evaluation protocol. She ate at different times, sat at different tables, and managed to be present in enough peripheral spaces that the information flowing to her was continuous and varied without anyone quite realizing they were providing it. Chief Holloway figured it out first. He found her in the equipment room on Wednesday afternoon, running her hand along the housing of a training device that had nothing to do with any evaluation metric on record. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, and then he said, "You're not just here for the program review." She turned around. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Holloway was 51 years old, 28 years in the Navy, and had the face of a man who had outlasted 3 generations of operators who thought they were smarter than him. He was the institutional memory of Red Harbor, the person who knew where everything was, how everything worked, and who had done what to whom, going back further than anyone cared to document officially. Chief Holloway, Elena said. Commander Voss. He didn't move from the doorway. I've been watching you for 10 days. You take notes that have nothing to do with training evaluation. You pull archive requests that are 2 flag levels above a program review clearance. And you spend more time watching people than you spend watching what the people are doing. He tilted his head slightly. That's an investigator's pattern, not an evaluator's. Elena set the device down. You're observant. I'm old, he said. Same thing after a while. He finally stepped into the room, letting the door close behind him. I've been at Red Harbor for 6 years. Before that, I was at Coronado for 9. I've seen a lot of people come through with dual assignments. He paused. The ones who end up mattering are the ones who already know what they're looking for when they arrive. She looked at him steadily. What makes you think I already know? Because you're not surprised by anything, Holloway said simply. Every evaluator I've ever seen, even the good ones, get surprised at least once in the first 2 weeks. Something they didn't expect. Something that makes them adjust their approach. You haven't adjusted once. He studied her. Which means, whatever you're finding here matches what you already knew. The silence between them was the comfortable kind. 2 people who were used to reading situations, accurately recognizing each other. How long have you known Cross? She asked. Holloway's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "Long enough," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He looked at the equipment beside her, then back at her face. "What I'll tell you is this. There are things at Red Harbor that don't have easy explanations. Things that have been here longer than the current command structure. Things that look like policy until you look at them from the right angle, and then they look like something else entirely." "What angle?" Elena said. Holloway was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The angle where you already know someone got hurt because information went the wrong direction." He held her gaze. "Am I warm?" Elena felt the cold thread from the file tighten in her chest. "Stay available," she said. "Don't change your routine. Don't talk to Cross about anything that isn't directly operationally necessary." She paused. "And if anyone asks you about me, you're thorough and boring and you drink terrible coffee," Holloway said. "Same thing I've been telling people for 10 days. She almost smiled. Almost. The twist came on Thursday, and it came from the last direction she had prepared for. She was in the restricted archive at 2100, working through the Nightfall Echo appendices, when she found the supplemental intelligence report. It was a document she hadn't known existed, not referenced in the main file, not indexed in the archive catalog. It was buried in an attachment chain under a routine logistics record from 8 years ago. The kind of deliberate misfiling that required someone to know exactly what they were hiding and exactly where to put it, so that a standard search algorithm would never surface it. Someone had worked hard to make this disappear. She read it 3 times. The supplemental report contained a pre-mission intelligence assessment of the extraction zone used in Nightfall Echo. It had been compiled 48 hours before her team deployed. It flagged 2 specific threat indicators that would have changed the mission parameters entirely. Indicators that, had they reached her commanding officer at the time, would have resulted in a postponement or a full abort. The report had been received. She could see the receipt confirmation. It had entered the command chain, and then it had stopped. The distribution list showed it moving through 4 hands before disappearing. She followed Maine with the focus of someone disarming something. Careful. Deliberate. Certain that one wrong move would collapse the whole structure. First recipient cleared irrelevant, passed it forward. Second, same. Third, an administrative processor whose name she didn't recognize. Fourth, she stopped. She read the name at the 4th position again. Then she sat back in her chair and did not move for 60 seconds. The 4th recipient was a then lieutenant commander assigned to Naval Special Warfare Pacific Command's Intelligence Coordination Office. His role at the time was exactly what it sounded like, coordinating the flow of intelligence between collection assets and operational commands. He was the last confirmed recipient before the report disappeared. His name was Adrian Cross. 8 years ago, Cross had been the intelligence coordination officer for the command that deployed Nightfall Echo. He had received the report that could have saved her team, and he had let it disappear. She stared at the screen. Outside the window, Red Harbor was dark and quiet. She could hear nothing. She felt nothing move in her body for a long time. No rage, no grief, no vindication. Just the terrible clarity of a truth she had spent 3 years pursuing, arriving without ceremony, without drama, without any of the feelings she had imagined would accompany it. Just a name on a distribution list. Just Adrian Cross standing between her team and the information that would have kept them alive. She looked at the document for another full minute. Then she opened a new file and began writing, methodically, precisely. Every detail, every reference, every connection in the order it would be needed by someone reading it for the first time without her context. She wrote for 3 hours. The next morning, she behaved exactly as she had every morning before it. She arrived early. She made bad coffee. She sat in the observation wing and watched the training floor. She took notes that looked like evaluation notes. Cross ran his session with his usual authority. He adjusted the Room 3 protocol based on her observation, and the improvement was immediate and significant. She noted it honestly, because whatever else was true about Cross, he was a good instructor, and the honest documentation of that fact would matter later when everything else about him was being examined. Carver appeared at his usual time with her coffee. He set it down and sat, and she let him stay because she had been thinking about what she needed, and Carver had something she could use, not his rank, not his access, but his clean history at Red Harbor. He had arrived 8 months ago after everything that mattered had already happened. His file was unburdened. "I need you to do something," she said without looking away from the training floor. "Okay," he said immediately. She turned to look at him. "Don't say okay before you know what it is." He met her gaze. "I trust your judgment more than I trust my own right now. Whatever you need." She studied him. 26 years old. Decorated. Earnest in a way that hadn't been beaten out of him yet by the institutional machinery that beat it out of most people. He meant what he said. "There's a records request I need submitted through official channels," she said. "Not my channels. Standard officer training evaluation channels, the kind that don't generate a flag above the program level. I need the full career history of every instructor currently assigned to Red Harbor, cross-referenced against Pacific Command intelligence coordination assignments from 8 years ago." Carver absorbed this. She watched his face move through the calculation, not just what she was asking for, but why, and what it meant that she needed it submitted through channels that wouldn't alert anyone monitoring her access trail. "You're looking for someone who was somewhere specific 8 years ago," he said. "I'm looking for everyone who was somewhere specific 8 years ago. The request needs to look routine. Training evaluation records cross-reference," he said slowly. "I can frame it as methodology continuity assessment. Instructors whose career history shows cross-program experience." He paused. "That's actually a reasonable evaluation metric. Nobody would flag it. Can you submit it without it looking like it came from me?" "It'll come from my evaluation support file. Standard Lieutenant's admin request." He looked at her carefully. "Commander, how deep does this go?" She held his gaze for a moment. "Deeper than Red Harbor," she said. He nodded once. The earnestness was still there, but something else had joined it, the particular steadiness of someone who has made a decision they know is right, even though it frightens them. "I'll have it submitted by 1100, he said. The records request came back faster than she expected, by 1600 that afternoon. Carver had the cross-reference results in hand and brought them to her workspace without being asked, which told her his instincts about urgency were developing at a satisfying rate. She read through the results. 3 instructors at Red Harbor had Pacific Command assignments in the relevant period. 2 of them were in roles that had no interface with intelligence coordination. She set them aside. The third was a senior instructor named Petty Officer First Class Raymond Torres, who had spent 14 months in a logistics support role attached to Pacific Command's intelligence section. Not intelligence coordination. Logistics support. But attached to the section. She pulled Torres's current training schedule. He ran the Advanced Land Navigation and Survival Track, a program that ran on a separate cycle from Cross's Advanced Operator course and had minimal interaction with the main training flow. She had not specifically observed his sessions because they fell outside the primary evaluation parameters. She had made an error, not a catastrophic one, but an error. She had narrowed her aperture too early. She added Torres to her active tracking list and requested his full duty records through Carver's submission channel. Then she sat with the information for an hour, turning it over, examining it from different angles, looking for the thing she was missing. It came to her at 1740, the logistics attachment. Torres's role had been logistics support for the intelligence section, which meant he wasn't running intelligence, he was moving it. Physical movement of classified materials. Couriers secure transfers document routing between the section and the commands it served. He had been the system that carried information from one place to another, which meant he could also carry it to nowhere. She stood up and walked to the window. Cross received the report. Cross let it disappear. But how had it disappeared? Not digitally, the digital record still showed it reaching Cross, which meant the document itself had continued to move physically after it hit his inbox. Someone had carried it somewhere it wasn't supposed to go, or failed to carry it somewhere it was. Torres had been the carrier. Cross had been the decision. She turned back to her desk and began writing again. Chief Holloway found her at 1900 in the corridor outside the equipment room, which she was beginning to understand was his preferred location for conversations he didn't want overheard. "Torres," he said. She stopped walking. "What about him?" she said carefully. "He's been watching you," Holloway said. "Not the way Carver watches you, not professional curiosity, the other kind." He kept his voice low and even. "Started Tuesday. I noticed it because Torres doesn't usually pay attention to anything that isn't his own program. He's territorial about his track keeps to himself. But he's been in 3 locations this week that put him in visual range of your workspace or your regular observation position." Elena felt the case she was building shift in her hands. Not collapse but change, shape the way a structure does. When you add a load, it wasn't designed to carry. "He knows I'm looking," she said. "Looks that way." "Does Cross know?" Holloway considered. "I don't think they've spoken directly, but Torres reported to the admin office this afternoon and requested a schedule review. He wants to shift 2 of his track sessions to different time blocks." He paused. The new time blocks would move him out of the observation wing's line of sight. She processed this. Torres was moving. Not running moving. Adjusting position. Which meant he was operational enough to know the difference between panic and tactical repositioning and experienced enough to choose the latter. Which also meant this was not his first time managing exposure. "Don't do anything," she told Holloway. "Don't watch him. Don't change your pattern. If he asks you anything about me, tell him I'm methodical and uninteresting, and you've heard I'm planning to request an extension of the evaluation period." Holloway's eyes sharpened. "You want him to think he has more time." "I want him to think he has enough time to be careful instead of fast," Elena said. "Careful people leave cleaner evidence than fast people." Holloway looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has just recalibrated their estimate of a situation significantly upward. 8 years is a long time to stay careful," he said quietly. "Yes," Elena said. "It is." She started walking again. Behind her, she heard Holloway stand still in the corridor for a long moment before he moved. Friday evening. The second week was ending. Elena sat in her workspace with the door closed and 3 separate document threads open on her screen. The Nightfall Echo file. The records cross-reference. The communication log she had been building from archive materials over the past 10 days. A reconstruction of the information flow during the 72 hours before her team deployed 8 years ago. The picture was not complete. It would not be complete until she had 2 things. She didn't yet have a physical connection between Torres and the specific routing failure, and a communication record that put Cross in direct knowledge of the threat assessment. At the time, the mission was still stoppable. What she had was circumstantial in the technical sense. In the human sense, it was the clearest picture of a betrayal she had ever seen. Her team had deployed into a situation that 2 people in this building had known was wrong. One of them had received the intelligence, evaluated it, and chosen to let it disappear rather than allow the mission to be delayed or aborted. The other had been the mechanism through which it disappeared. 4 operators had not come home. She looked at their names, which she had memorized 8 years ago, and had not needed to write down since because they lived in a part of her mind she could access without trying and could not close without trying harder. Senior Chief Daniel Park. Petty Officer 2nd Class Marcus Webb. Lieutenant Junior Grade Alicia Torres. Operations Specialist 1st Class Kevin Ray. She sat with their names for exactly as long as she allowed herself to, and then she closed that part of her mind and returned to the documents. She had 2 weeks and 4 days remaining. She would be ready. Downstairs, she heard the sound of the evening training shift, ending boots on the floor. Voices, the controlled noise of people who had been pushed hard all day and were moving toward rest. She heard Cross's voice among them, clear and authoritative, offering a final word to his operators before dismissal. She heard the specific cadence of a man who considered himself a leader of exceptional people and believed that completely. She thought about the 48-hour intelligence report sitting in his inbox 8 years ago. She thought about the decision he had made when he read it. She tried with genuine effort to understand what calculation a person runs in that moment, what they tell themselves, what they prioritize, what they sacrifice, and what they protect. She couldn't reach it. She had tried before over 3 years, and she could never quite get to the inside of that decision. It was the one place in the entire architecture of Nightfall Echo that remained opaque to her. Maybe that was the point. Maybe there are some choices that can't be understood from the outside, only prosecuted. She closed the documents. She opened a new message addressed to a secure contact at Naval Special Operations Command, a contact whose name appeared nowhere on her official assignment records. She typed 4 words. Ready to move forward. She sent it. Then she shut down her laptop, picked up her cold coffee, and sat in the dark for a while. Tomorrow Cross would run his Sunday morning conditioning session, and she would be watching from the observation wing, and nothing about her appearance or her behavior would suggest that everything had already changed, that the quiet woman in the corner had found what she came for and was now simply managing the distance between discovery and justice, one careful day at a time. She was good at managing distance. She had been doing it for 3 years. She could do 4 more weeks standing still. The response came back in 11 hours. She was already awake when it arrived, 0412, her laptop open in the dark, the cursor blinking against a screen that had been waiting longer than she had. The message from her contact at Naval Special Operations Command was 4 lines. No greeting, no signature, no operational language that would mean anything to anyone reading it without context. 4 lines that meant everything. The first confirmed her timeline. The second confirmed her authorization to proceed to active evidence collection. The third told her that a secondary team was standing by but would not deploy unless she requested them. This was still her operation, her pace, her call. The fourth line was the one she read 3 times. It said, Cross has applied for early reassignment. Submitted yesterday. He doesn't know we intercepted it. She sat with that for a long moment. Cross was moving. Not Torres, who had been making careful lateral adjustments. Cross himself was trying to leave Red Harbor. After 2 weeks of watching her watch him, after the corridor conversation, after the room. 3 correction that he'd made too fast, he had decided that the smartest play was to create distance between himself and whatever he suspected she was building. He was right that distance was smart. He was wrong that it was still available to him. She typed a single word back, understood. Then she closed the laptop and sat in the dark for another 20 minutes thinking about timing. Because timing was the one element she couldn't control. From the outside, she could construct the case perfectly, could have every thread in place, and still lose everything if she moved too early or too late. Too early, and the evidence chain was incomplete. Too late, and Cross was gone, and the institutional machinery that had buried Nightfall Echo for 8 years would find a way to bury it further. She had maybe 10 days. She got up, made coffee, and began the final phase. Sunday ran on a different rhythm at Red Harbor. The training schedule was lighter, the corridors quieter, and the people who remained on base moved with the particular ease of professionals who were still working but not performing. It was the day Elena had always found most useful, because people relaxed on Sundays, and relaxed people were less careful about what they said and where they said it. She found Torres at 0900, not deliberately, or rather deliberately constructed to appear not deliberate. She had positioned herself in the equipment staging area. At the time, his navigation track students collected their gear, which happened every Sunday morning, regardless of the session schedule adjustment he had requested. The adjustment hadn't been approved yet. She knew that because Holloway had told her, and Holloway knew because he was the one who processed equipment requests and had a natural reason to know every operational schedule on the base. Torres walked in and stopped when he saw her. It lasted 1 second. 1 second of stillness that a person not specifically trained to read that particular kind of freeze would have missed entirely. Then he moved again, natural, as walked to the equipment rack, began pulling navigation gear with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. Petty Officer Torres, Elena said pleasantly. Commander Voss. His voice was easy, controlled. Good. I haven't had a chance to observe your track yet, she said. I'd like to schedule a session this week if that works for you. He looked at her directly. His eyes were steady, and his expression was professionally neutral, And she could see the calculation running behind both of those things. The rapid, careful assessment of what her request meant, what it revealed about what she knew, how much danger it represented. "Of course," he said. "Tuesday works. We run a full navigation sequence starting at 0700. "I'll be there," she said. She left without looking back. She had no intention of waiting until Tuesday. She went to Carver at 1000. He was in the officer mess off-duty, which was where she needed him, away from the training flow, away from Cross's orbit, in a setting where a conversation looked like nothing more than two people sharing a table. She sat across from him without asking. He looked up from his coffee and read her face in about 2 seconds. "What happened?" he said quietly. "I need everything Torres has touched in the past 8 years that intersects with a Pacific Command logistics function," she said, keeping her voice even and low. "Not just his official assignment record. I need transfer orders, temporary duty assignments. Any TAD that put him near a Pacific Command intelligence function. Specifically anything in a 14-month window 8 years back." Carver set his coffee down. "The records I pulled already showed his Pacific attachment. I need the granular duty log from inside that attachment. What he physically moved, where it went, who signed the receipts." Carver was quiet for a moment. "That's not going to come through a standard evaluation channel request. That level of logistics detail lives in a different archive tier." "I know. Which means you need access I don't have." "No," Elena said. "It means I need a request submitted through a channel that isn't mine. Because if I pull it directly, Torres will know within 48 hours he has someone watching my access log." Carver absorbed this. She watched the implications settle across his face. Not just that Torres was monitoring her, but what that monitoring meant about Torres's level of investment in what she was finding. "He's scared," Carver said. "He's careful," Elena said. "There's a difference. Scared people make noise. Careful people make plans." She held his gaze. "Which is why we need to move before his plan matures." "Who can submit the request?" Carver asked. "Captain Marlowe," she said. "He has the authorization level and a legitimate administrative reason to access instructor duty logs as part of command oversight. But I can't go to him directly without tipping my timeline." Carver thought for a moment. "I can go to him," he said slowly. "Frame it as a due diligence request for the evaluation report. Cross-referencing instructor background against program methodology for the final assessment. It's thin, but it's plausible." "It doesn't need to be airtight," Elena said. "It just needs to buy me 48 hours before anyone asks a follow-up question." He nodded. "I'll go this afternoon." "Carver." She waited until he met her eyes. "When you talk to Marlowe, watch his reaction. Not what he says. What his face does before he decides what to say." Carver looked at her carefully. "You think Marlowe might be involved?" "I think everyone at Red Harbor is a variable until they're not," she said. "That's not suspicion, that's method." He nodded again slowly, with the gravity of someone who understood that the world he'd walked into this Sunday morning was considerably more complex than the one he'd left on Saturday night. She spent Sunday afternoon in the archive. What she was building now was not just an evidence file, it was a sequence. The difference mattered enormously. An evidence file was a collection of facts. A sequence was a story, with causation, with chronology, with the specific connective tissue that allowed someone reading it cold to follow the chain from decision to consequence, without needing her to walk them through it. She needed it to be that precise, because when this moved out of her hands, and it would, that was the nature of what she was building toward. It would move into the hands of people who would look for every possible reason to doubt it. She intended to leave them nothing to hold on to. The archive thread she followed. Sunday afternoon was the communication log between Pacific Command's Intelligence Coordination Office and the operational commands it served in the 72 hours before Nightfall Echo deployed. She had been working this thread in pieces for 2 weeks. Now she assembled the pieces in order for the first time, and the picture that emerged from the assembly was worse than the individual pieces had suggested. The threat assessment hadn't just been received by Cross and then disappeared. It had been received acknowledged with a routing confirmation, and then actively rerouted away from the operational command that needed it. The reroute went to a holding file designated for non-priority intelligence, a bureaucratic category that functionally meant it would not be seen again without a specific request, and no one was going to make a specific request because no one below Cross knew the document existed. The reroute was documented. The authorization on the reroute carried Cross's access credentials, and the timestamp on the reroute was 41 hours before Nightfall Echo deployed. She read that timestamp 4 times. 41 hours. Cross had known for 41 hours that the mission was deploying into threat conditions that hadn't been accounted for in the operational plan. He had seen the assessment, made a decision, and buried it. And then he had presumably watched the mission deploy, watched 4 operators fail to come home, and done nothing. For 8 years, he had done nothing. She closed the archive. She went for a walk the first time in 2 weeks. She had left the building without a specific operational purpose. She needed air, not because she was sentimental about it, but because the cold thread in her chest had become something heavier since the timestamp, and she knew from long experience that the heaviness needed to be metabolized before it became something that interfered with her work. She thought about Daniel Park. He had been the kind of senior chief who remembered everyone's birthday, not performatively, but because he actually kept track and actually cared. He had made her coffee once before a mission briefing and handed it to her without being asked, and she had thought about that small moment more times than she could count over the past 8 years. She thought about Alicia Torres, no relation to Raymond, who had been 24, and so good at her job, that Elena had sometimes felt she was running to keep up with her. Marcus Webb, who carried a photograph of his daughter in the left breast pocket of every uniform he owned. Kevin Ray, who sang badly and without apology during long vehicle transits and had made everyone laugh even when laughing felt impossible. She stood still for a moment. Then she went back inside. There was more work to do. Carver found her at 1830 with the expression of someone carrying something heavier than he'd left with. Marlowe approved the request, he said. He didn't ask many questions. What did his face do? Carver paused. He looked like he'd been expecting someone to ask for something like this, he said carefully. Not surprised. More like resigned. Like a man who'd been waiting for a bill to come due. Elena was still. Did he say anything off script? He said one thing when I was leaving. Carver's voice was careful, precise. The voice of someone repeating words exactly. He said, "Tell whoever needs to hear it that I'm ready to cooperate fully." I didn't respond. I didn't know if I was supposed to. You did exactly right, Elena said. She thought about Marlowe, the man who had let her into the full archive, the man who had not called Admiral Haynes to verify her credentials, the man who had closed a folder and said the archives are available to you with the look of someone accepting a consequence rather than granting a permission. Marlowe knew something. Maybe not the full architecture of it, but something. And he had been sitting with it, and it had been sitting with him, and now he was ready to cooperate fully because 8 years of carrying a thing in silence had apparently reached its limit. That changed her timeline. Not accelerated it, she still needed the Torres duty log to complete the chain. But it widened the support structure, which meant when she moved, she would not be moving alone. Go get some rest, she told Carver. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. He nodded and started to leave. At the door he stopped. Commander Voss, the 4 operators, from the mission. He turned around. Were they your friends? She looked at him for a long moment. They were my team, she said. He nodded once and left. Monday arrived with the particular tension of a week that already knew what it contained. Cross ran his morning session with an edge Elena hadn't seen before. Not emotional. Cross was too disciplined for that, but structural. He was pushing his operators harder than the program called for, running them past the standard session endpoints, demanding repetitions that served no new pedagogical purpose, but kept everyone moving and kept him in the position of directing the movement. He was burning energy that had nowhere else to go. She watched from above and took her notes. At 1 when Hendrik Torres's duty log came through on Carver's channel. She read it in her workspace with the door locked. The log covered the 14-month Pacific Command detachment in meticulous administrative detail, every document handled, every transfer executed, every chain of custody signature. It was exactly the kind of record that a logistics support function produced and filed, and never expected anyone to read carefully, because there was nothing obviously wrong with any individual entry. It was only when you read it against the Nightfall Echo timeline, cross-referencing the specific document numbers against the archive records she had already assembled, that the picture clarified. Torres had handled the threat assessment. Physically. He had signed for it when it was rerouted by Cross's access credentials, and his signature on the receiving end of the reroute was the last official documentation the document received before it ceased to exist in any active file. He had taken it. She didn't know yet whether he'd been instructed to take it and destroy it, or whether he'd acted with some degree of independent motivation, or whether he'd even understood at the time what he was holding. The log didn't answer that. But the log did answer the question of physical custody, and physical custody was the thread that connected Cross's decision to the document's disappearance in a way that could not be explained by administrative error or system failure. This was not negligence. This was coordinated concealment. She opened her secure message channel and typed 4 lines to her contact at Naval Special Operations Command. This time, the lines were specific. Evidence chain complete for primary subject. Secondary subject, physical custody confirmed. Request formal investigative handoff within 72 hours. Advise on cross-command coordination to prevent subject flight. She sent it. Then she sat back and thought about the next 72 hours. Cross found her at lunch. It was the first time he had sought her out since their corridor conversation in week 1, and the fact that he was doing it now, after the reassignment request, after Torres's schedule adjustment, after 2 weeks of watching her without approaching, told her that something had shifted in his calculation. He had decided that distance wasn't working, and that engagement was a better strategy. He sat down across from her in the officer mess without being invited. He carried his tray with the same easy physical confidence he always did, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who had decided to be direct. "I want to know where the evaluation stands," he said. "The midpoint report goes to Program Command next week," Elena said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him steadily. "What did you ask, Commander?" "I asked where it stands." He set his fork down. "My program, my track. What does your assessment say?" "It says your program is exceptional," she said. "Your operators perform at consistently high levels. The methodology is sound. The Room 3 adjustment you made in week 1 was exactly the right call, and it's already producing measurable improvement in the CQB metrics." He watched her say all of it. She said it without inflection, because all of it was true, and truthful things didn't require inflection. "That's the professional assessment," he said. "That's the only assessment I have. Elena." It was the first time he'd used her name. She noted it. "I've been in this business long enough to know when someone is doing 2 things at once. You're good at this. Better than anyone I've seen come through here on an evaluation assignment." He paused. "But you're doing 2 things. She held his gaze. "What's the second thing?" she said. The silence stretched between them. She watched him decide how far to go, and she watched the decision resolve, and what it resolved into was not the confrontation she had been prepared for. "I knew about Nightfall Echo," he said quietly. The mess hall was loud around them. Trays and voices and the controlled noise of 100 people eating. It all went very far away. "What did you know?" she said. Her voice was level. She was proud of that. He looked at his tray, then back at her. "I was in the coordination office. I received operational intelligence that was relevant to that mission. I made a decision about how to route it." He stopped. "And," she said, "and I've been making a different decision about that decision every day for 8 years, he said. "Telling myself it was a judgment call, that the threat indicators were ambiguous, that the operational timeline was already committed, that pulling the mission would have had its own consequences." He stopped again. "I've been very good at telling myself things." Elena felt something move in her chest that was not the cold thread. Something older and rawer and less controlled. 4 people didn't come home, she said. I know. Daniel Park, Marcus Webb, Alicia Torres, Kevin Ray. He flinched at the names. She saw it clearly. He knew the names too. I know, he said again, barely audible now. She sat very still. She had imagined this conversation not in its exact form, but in its essential shape many times over 3 years. She had imagined herself with something to say. A confrontation, an accusation, a delivery of everything she had spent 3 years building. She had imagined anger. She had imagined the controlled, precise anger of someone who has been waiting long enough that the anger has refined itself into something surgical. What she actually felt was tired, not defeated, not without purpose. Just tired in the specific way of someone who has been carrying a weight across a very long distance and has finally arrived at the place where they can set it down. Then you know what happens next, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. I applied for reassignment, he said. I know. Another pause. It won't be approved. No, she said. It won't. Cross was quiet for a very long time. Around them, the mess hall moved and breathed and made its ordinary noise completely indifferent to the conversation happening at this table between 2 people whose professional surfaces were perfectly intact and whose interior reality was something else entirely. What did Torres do? Cross said finally. That's part of the investigation, Elena said. How was following my direction? Cross said. Whatever he did, he was acting on instruction. I want that on record. Elena looked at him carefully. This was the second unexpected thing he had given her in this conversation, and she needed to process it accurately. He was not protecting Torres out of loyalty or affection. He was establishing a record of his own culpability in a way that reduced the exposure of someone who had been in his telling following orders. It was the first genuinely decent thing she had seen him do. That will be part of the investigation, she said again. You'll have the opportunity to provide a full account. He nodded slowly. He looked older than he had on Monday of week 1, when he had walked onto the training floor with his coffee and his easy authority and his complete certainty about the shape of the world. The certainty was gone. She wasn't sure when it had gone, whether it had been going for 8 years, or whether something about the past 2 weeks had finally dissolved it. She picked up her tray. Commander Cross, she said, standing. Don't leave Red Harbor. He looked up at her. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She believed him. The response from Naval Special Operations Command came at 2200. She read it twice. A formal investigative team would arrive at Red Harbor in 72 hours. Her evidence package would be received and processed through a command channel that bypassed the Pacific Command structure. A deliberate routing choice that closed the institutional loop that had allowed Nightfall Echo to be buried in the first place. Cross would be placed on administrative hold pending full review. Torres would be separately interviewed. And then, at the bottom of the message, one additional line. Commander Voss, formal recognition proceedings for Nightfall Echo personnel have been initiated pending outcome of investigation. Families have been notified that new information has come to light. She stared at that line for a long time. She thought about Daniel Park's birthday habit. She thought about Kevin Ray singing badly in a vehicle that smelled like diesel and red clay. She thought about Marcus Webb's photograph and Alicia Torres's impossible competence and the specific weight of 4 names she had carried for 8 years across every quiet room and every sleepless night. And every morning she had gotten up and gone back to work, because going back to work was the only form of loyalty she had left to offer them. She did not cry. She had made a decision about crying a long time ago, and it was a decision she respected, even now, even here. She closed the message. She opened a new document and began writing the formal evidence summary, the document that would travel to the investigative team that would accompany every piece of material she had assembled over 3 years and the past 2 weeks that would carry the names of her team into the light where they belonged. She wrote through midnight. She wrote past it. Outside, Red Harbor slept. And Elena Voss, who had arrived quiet and alone and unremarkable. 16 days ago, wrote the last careful pages of the case that was going to change everything for Cross, for Torres, for Marlowe, for every operator who had trained here without knowing what the ground beneath this institution was built on. She wrote it for 4 people who could not read it. She wrote it anyway. The investigative team arrived on a Wednesday. Not dramatically. Not with the institutional theater that Elena had seen in lesser operations. No convoy, no formal announcement, no advance notice distributed through command channels that would have given anyone time to prepare a posture. 3 people in unmarked vehicles, civilian clothes credentials that would not have meant anything to someone who didn't know what office issued them. They came through the main gate at 0640 before the morning training cycle had properly begun, and they went directly to Captain Marlowe's office. Elena was already there. She had been there since 0600, sitting across from Marlowe at his conference table with her evidence package organized in the precise order she had determined 2 nights ago, not chronologically, but causally. Each document positioned to answer the question the previous one would naturally generate in a careful reader's mind. She had spent 20 years learning how to build cases that moved under their own momentum, that didn't require her to be in the room explaining them. This one was the best she had ever constructed. She knew that without vanity, the same way she knew the range grouping from week 1 was exceptional, it was simply an accurate assessment. The lead investigator's name was Commander Sarah Whitfield. She was Naval Criminal Investigative Service, 15 years in, and she had the particular quality. Elena recognized immediately the quality of someone who had seen enough to be unshockable and was therefore genuinely useful in situations that would have rattled a less seasoned person. She walked into Marlowe's office, shook hands with Elena, sat down and opened her own folder without preamble. "I've read the package you transmitted," Whitfield said. "All of it, twice." "And," Elena said, "and I want to walk through the Torres duty log sequence in detail before we move to Cross." She looked up from her folder. "Not because I doubt it. Because when this reaches the review board, they're going to try to find the seam between Torres's physical custody and Cross's authorization, and I want to make sure there isn't one." "There isn't," Elena said. "Show me." So Elena showed her. She walked Whitfield through the sequence she had assembled: the threat assessment's path from collection to Cross's inbox, the reroute authorization, Torres's custody signature, the non-priority holding file, where the document ceased to exist in any operational sense. She did it in 11 minutes because she had rehearsed it until it ran at that speed, and Whitfield followed every step without asking her to slow down, which told Elena that the 15 years of experience were not an exaggeration. When Elena finished, Whitfield was quiet for a moment. "The timestamp," Whitfield said. 41 hours before deployment, Elena confirmed. He had 41 hours to pull the mission. "Yes." Whitfield looked at the document in front of her. 4 people died. "Yes." The word sat between them. Not heavily, Elena had learned to carry it without weight, or at least without visible weight, but with the specific gravity of a fact that had no softening context, no mitigating framework, no way to be made smaller than it was. Marlowe, who had been silent at the head of the table since the investigators arrived, said quietly, "What do you need from me?" Whitfield looked at him. "Everything," she said simply. "Everything you know, everything you've suspected, everything you've seen at Red Harbor, that didn't have an easy explanation. We'll start with your formal statement this afternoon." Marlowe nodded. He looked like a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time and had finally been told he could exhale. "I've been ready for 2 weeks," he said. Elena looked at him. He caught her gaze and held it for a moment, and in that moment she understood something she hadn't been certain of until now. Marlowe had known or suspected for longer than 2 weeks. Much longer. And whatever he had been unable to act on alone, he had quietly maintained a readiness to support when someone else arrived with the leverage to move it. He had been waiting for her in a sense. Not for her specifically, but for whoever finally came. She was glad it had been her. Cross was informed at 0900. She was not present for that conversation. It was Whitfield's jurisdiction now, and Elena's role had shifted from investigator to witness the moment the formal team arrived, a transition she had prepared herself for and accepted without difficulty. She had built the case. She had delivered it. What happened next was someone else's machinery. But she heard the sound of it. She was in the corridor outside Marlowe's office when Whitfield's team walked Cross in, and she heard his voice through the door. Not the words, but the register. The voice of a man encountering a situation that was real, in a way that his private reckoning with it sitting across from Elena in the mess hall had not fully prepared him for. There is a difference between knowing what is coming and feeling it arrive, and she heard that difference in the texture of his voice through a closed door, and she acknowledged it without satisfaction and without sympathy, which was the most honest response she could manage. She walked away from the door. She went to find Holloway. He was in the equipment room where she had expected him to be, moving through a morning inventory with the methodical patience of a man who had learned to make his work meditative. He looked up when she came in and read her face in the way he had been reading faces for 28 years. "It's moving," he said. Not a question. "It's moving," she confirmed. He set down the clipboard. "Torres. This afternoon. They'll pull him from his session." Holloway was quiet for a moment. "He's going to say he was following orders." "Cross already said that for him," Elena said. "He told me on Monday that Torres was acting on instruction. He wanted it on record." Holloway's expression shifted, something moving through it that was complex enough that she didn't try to name it. Not quite respect and not quite surprise, but somewhere in the territory between them. "Cross said that," he said. "Yes." Holloway picked up his clipboard again, then set it down again. "You know, I've been watching that man for 6 years. I've disagreed with him on 100 things. I never thought he was a coward." He paused. "I still don't. I think he made the worst decision of his life 8 years ago and spent every day since then becoming someone who was almost good enough to make himself forget it." Elena looked at him. "Almost," she said. "Almost." Holloway agreed. She stood in the equipment room for another moment. Downstairs, she could hear the morning training cycle in full operation, boots on concrete, voices, counting the organized noise of people being pushed toward their limits under the instruction of senior operators, who would have no idea for the next several hours that the command structure above them was quietly being taken apart. "What happens to the program?" Holloway asked. "The evaluation report stands," Elena said. "The program is excellent. What it's been built on is not. Those are two different things, and the review board will treat them as two different things." She paused. "Red Harbor will continue. The operators here have done nothing wrong. They deserve a command structure that matches what they've built." Holloway absorbed this. "And you?" She looked at him. "What about me? What happens to you?" he said. Not sentimentally, just directly, the way he said everything. She considered the question honestly, which she hadn't had much time to do in the past 3 weeks. "I finish the formal testimony. I submit the full evidence package. I debrief the investigative team on the Nightfall Echo timeline from my operational perspective." She paused. "And then I figure out what comes next." "You've been running on this for 3 years, Holloway said. "Yes. That's a long time to run on one thing." "Yes," she said again. He looked at her with the steady, experienced gaze of a man who understood what long-sustained purpose felt like when it reached its end, and what the particular emptiness of that moment contained. "You'll find something worth running toward," he said. "People like you always do." She nodded once. Then she left the equipment room and went to find Carver. I was waiting outside her workspace, which she had expected. Carver had a reliable instinct for when he was needed that she had come to appreciate over 3 weeks. He looked at her with the careful, attentive expression that had been his default since their first real conversation, and she could see that he had already understood from the general atmosphere of the morning that things were in motion. "They're here," he said. "Since Aero 640. He exhaled slowly. "Cross. With Whitfield's team now." Carver was quiet for a moment. She watched him process the reality of it, the instructor he had trained under, whose program he had respected, sitting in a room with federal investigators. It was not a simple thing to process, and she gave him the space to do it without rushing him toward the response she needed. "He was a good instructor," Carver said finally. "Not a defense, just an honest statement. He was, Elena agreed. How does that fit with the rest of it? It doesn't have to fit, she said. People are not one thing. Cross was a genuinely skilled instructor, and he made a decision 8 years ago that got 4 people killed and spent the time since becoming someone who had almost buried it deeply enough to live with. Both of those are true. They don't resolve each other. Carver thought about that. That's harder to understand than if he were just a bad person. Yes, she said. It is. And it's more useful to understand. He looked at her steadily. What do you need from me now? Your formal statement, she said. Everything you submitted through your channel, every conversation we had, every observation you made. Whitfield's team will want it documented from your perspective as an independent witness. I can do that. There's one more thing. She paused. When they interview you about me, and they will tell them exactly what you observed. Not what you think they want to hear. Not what you think helps the case. Exactly what you saw in the order you saw it. He looked slightly surprised. You think they'll question your methods? They'll question everything, Elena said. That's their job, and it should be. The case needs to hold up against scrutiny applied to every person involved, including me. Especially me. She held his gaze. I came here with a predetermined conclusion and built a case to support it. That's not a standard investigative methodology, and I know it. What makes it valid is that every piece of evidence I found would have led an independent investigator to the same conclusion by a different route. Your honest account of my methods supports that argument. A cleaned-up version of my methods doesn't. Carver absorbed this for a long moment. You're the most precise person I've ever met, he said. She almost smiled. Don't let that stop you from being honest about my flaws. Yes, ma'am, he said with the ghost of something that was almost lightness. The afternoon brought the second major development, and it came from a direction Elena had identified as a risk, but had not been certain would materialize. Torres didn't wait to be pulled from his session. At 13:40, 40 minutes before Whitfield's team was scheduled to approach his track, Torres walked into Marlowe's office and asked to speak to the investigators directly. Elena was told about this by Whitfield's second, a quiet, precise lieutenant commander named Okafor, who found her in the observation wing and delivered the information with the neutral efficiency of someone relaying a fact rather than an assessment. He came in voluntarily, Okafor said. Elena turned this over. What's his posture? Cooperative. Extremely cooperative. He's been talking for 40 minutes. Okafor paused. He knew you were going to reach him. He said he's been watching your access pattern for 10 days, and he knew on day 6 what you were building. What's he offering? Everything, Okafor said. His complete account of the document routing, his communications with Cross during the relevant period, and something we didn't have in your package. She looked at Okafor directly. Torres kept records, Okafor said. Personal records. His own documentation of every instruction he received from Cross regarding the Nightfall Echo intelligence materials. Dates, time, specific language used. He's been holding them for 8 years. The observation wing was very quiet. Why? Elena said. He says he knew from the beginning that what he was doing was wrong. He says he followed the instruction because Cross was a superior officer and he was 23 years old and he didn't know how to refuse. And then afterward, he couldn't find a way to come forward without destroying himself along with Cross. Okafor's voice remained neutral. He kept the records because he needed to believe that someday someone would ask the right questions and he would be able to answer them. Elena stood very still. 23 years old. Following an order he knew was wrong because he didn't know yet that wrong orders were the ones most urgently requiring refusal. Carrying the weight of it for 8 years alongside the private documentation of his own culpability, which was either a deeply moral act or an act of profound self-protection, or, and this was the most human possibility both simultaneously. His records, she said. Are they verifiable? Whitfield is already cross-referencing against your timeline, Okafor said. Preliminary match is consistent across every documented point. The language he recorded Cross using in his instructions is consistent with the authorization trail you found in the archive. A pause. His account fills the gap between Cross's inbox and the physical document custody. It's the connective tissue you said you didn't have. She had said that. 3 weeks ago, sitting in this room, she had noted that the one thing her case still needed was the human link between Cross's decision and Torres's action, the conversation, the instruction, the specific moment where concealment became a shared act. Torres had that conversation documented. He had been holding it for 8 years, waiting for exactly this. She turned to the window. Below, the training floor was running its afternoon cycle. Operators moved through their drills with the focused, controlled intensity that she had been watching for 3 weeks, and she thought about the fact that none of them knew, and that their not knowing was not a failure, but simply the natural condition of people doing their jobs honestly inside an institution whose corruption lived several layers above them. They deserved better than what had been built above them. They were going to get it. "Tell Whitfield I'm available whenever she needs me," Elena said. Okafor nodded and left. Elena turned back to the window and stayed there for a while, watching the operators below, thinking about the architecture of this particular moment. The way 8 years of buried truth had finally, under the right applied pressure, cracked open from 3 directions simultaneously. Her evidence chain. Cross's private confession in a mess hall. Torres walking voluntarily through a door he had been standing outside of for nearly a decade. She had not anticipated all of it. She had anticipated none of the specific forms it took. What she had anticipated was the general principle that the truth properly pressured tends to find its own way out. That people carrying the weight of concealment for long enough will eventually welcome the moment when the weight is lifted, even if the lifting is painful. She had built the pressure. The rest had followed its own logic. Cross was formally placed on administrative hold at 1600. She knew because she heard the particular silence that followed. A bass has a sound, a rhythm. And when something fundamental changes in its command structure, the rhythm changes too slightly in ways that people who live inside it register without being able to articulate. She heard it from her workspace. The change in frequency. The specific quality of 100 people simultaneously sensing that something had shifted without knowing what. Carver appeared in her doorway at 16:15. "It's official," he said. "Whitfield's team just briefed Marlowe formally. Cross is on hold. Torres is in a voluntary hold, pending full review, and Marlowe is acting sole commander, pending appointment of interim command." He paused. "The operators are going to know by dinner." "What will they think?" she said. He considered. "Some of them are going to be angry," he said honestly. Cross had people who believed in him, people he trained personally whose careers he shaped. Losing him is going to feel like a betrayal to some of them, even if they understand why it happened. "That's fair," Elena said. "Some of them are going to be relieved," Carver continued. "The ones who noticed things and didn't have a framework for what they were noticing. You've given them a framework." She looked at him. "And you?" He thought about it with the seriousness she had come to expect from him. "I feel like I'm standing at the end of something, and the beginning of something else, and I don't know yet which one is more important." He paused. "I think I'm grateful. I know I'm uncertain, and I'm aware that those two things are going to take a while to sort themselves out." "That's a very honest answer," she said. "You told me to be honest," he said simply. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You did well, Lieutenant. In a situation that was significantly more complex than your rank required you to handle, you made good decisions. Every one of them." She held his gaze. "That will be in my report." He looked at her with the particular expression of someone receiving something they didn't ask for and aren't sure they deserve and are going to spend some time thinking about. "Thank you, Commander," he said quietly. Whitfield found her at 1900 after the formal interview sessions had concluded for the day. She sat across from Elena in the workspace with 2 cups of coffee. Better coffee than Elena had been making, which Elena noted with appreciation, and for the first time since her arrival that morning, her expression was something other than professionally neutral. "The Torres records," she said. "Yes, they changed the scope of this." Whitfield wrapped her hands around her coffee. "What we have now is not just the Nightfall Echo incident. Torres's documentation includes 2 other instances where intelligence was selectively routed in ways that benefited specific operational outcomes. Different missions, different time period, same mechanism. Elena went still. 2 other instances, she said. He didn't know if they resulted in casualties. He only documented what he directly handled. But the pattern is there. Cross used the routing mechanism at least twice more after Nightfall Echo. Whitfield's voice was level. Which means this is not a single catastrophic judgment call. This is a practice. The cold thread was back, colder than it had been in days. Names, Elena said. We're pulling the mission records now. We'll know by tomorrow morning whether the other 2 routing instances correspond to operational outcomes that need to be re-examined. Elena thought about that. 2 more missions. 2 more sets of operators who had deployed without complete intelligence, whose survival or failure might trace back to the same mechanism, the same pair of hands, the same decision being made again and again by a man who had learned that it worked. How systematic, she said. It looks that way. Then the original case was bigger than I knew. You knew enough, Whitfield said. You got us here. The rest of it was always going to be the investigation's job to find. She paused. But I want you to know the package you built is the foundation. Without it, Torres doesn't come forward. Without Torres, the additional instances stay buried. She looked at Elena steadily. You didn't just break open Nightfall Echo. You broke open whatever this actually is. Elena looked at her coffee. She had come to Red Harbor for 4 people. She had found something that was potentially much larger than 4 people, and the expansion of scope brought with it a complexity of response that she hadn't prepared for. Not grief, not anger, but a kind of stunned reckoning with the possibility that the thing she had spent 3 years trying to understand was a smaller piece of a larger pattern than she had ever suspected. How long, she said. How far back might this go? We don't know yet, Whitfield said honestly. Torres's records cover his specific period of attachment. Cross's career before that will have to be examined separately. She paused. This is going to take months. It may take longer, but it's going to be done completely. Elena nodded. I need you available for continued consultation, Whitfield said. Not at Red Harbor necessarily, you've done what you came to do here, but available. I'll be available, Elena said. Whitfield stood, picked up her coffee, looked at Elena for a moment with something that might have been the closest thing to admiration that a 15-year NCIS investigator allowed herself in professional settings. One more thing, she said. The formal recognition proceedings for the Nightfall Echo personnel, the ones NAVSOC initiated. The review board convenes in 6 weeks. They'll want you to testify. She paused. Not as a witness to the investigation, as a member of the team, the surviving member. The surviving member. She had not heard herself referred to that way in a long time. She had not used that phrase internally in a long time. She had trained herself away from it because the phrase contained a weight she had found more useful to carry in smaller pieces. Now it landed fully, and she let it. I'll be there, she said. Whitfield nodded and left. Elena sat alone in the workspace where she had spent 3 weeks building a case in silence, and she thought about 6 weeks from now. A review board, her voice in a formal setting, the names of her team spoken into an official record by the person who had known them best and survived to say them. She thought about what it would mean to finally speak those names into a room that was built to hear them. She thought it would feel like finishing something and starting something else. She was ready for both. She didn't sleep that night, not because of anxiety, not because of the particular restless energy that sometimes accompanied the end of a long operation, but because she was thinking about the 2 additional missions Whitfield had mentioned, and thinking had a way of pulling her forward into the early hours without her permission. She lay still in the dark and let it run the possibility that Nightfall Echo was not the beginning of the pattern, but somewhere in the middle of it, that Cross had been doing this longer than she knew, that the 4 people she had carried for 3 years might be joined in a formal reckoning by others she had never met, and whose families were waiting for answers they didn't yet know to ask for. It was a large thought. She held it carefully. By 0430, She had stopped trying to sleep and was back at her laptop reviewing the evidence package one final time, not because anything needed changing, but because she needed the discipline of going through it sequentially, one more time before she handed it completely to Whitfield's team, and accepted that it was no longer hers to manage. There was a specific grief in that transfer, small but real. She had lived inside this case for 3 years. Releasing it was not simple, even when releasing it was right. She finished the review at 0545. Everything was in order. Everything had always been in order. She closed the laptop and made coffee, and sat with the quiet of a base that hadn't woken up yet, and she let herself feel for a few minutes the full weight of what the past 3 weeks had been. Not just the investigation, the whole of it. The plain uniform, and the single bag, and the quiet table in the corner, and the coffee that was always cold, and the 12 rounds on the range that had changed the temperature of every room she walked into afterward. The corridor conversations, and the careful words, and the long nights in the archive, and the 41-hour timestamp that had confirmed what she'd suspected, and still hit her like something physical when she finally saw it. She had done what she came to do. The doing of it had cost her nothing she hadn't already agreed to spend. Thursday morning at Red Harbor had a different quality than any morning before it. She felt it the moment she stepped into the main corridor at 0700, the particular atmospheric shift of an institutional community that has received information it is still processing. The operators knew. Not everything, not the details, not the full scope of what Whitfield's team was building in the secure review room that had been established in the East Wing. But they knew that Cross was on administrative hold, that Torres had walked voluntarily into an investigator's office, and that the quiet intelligence analyst in the observation wing was somehow at the center of all of it. She walked through the corridor and felt the attention follow her. Not hostile attention. Not uniformly anyway. There were faces that were confused, faces that were troubled, a few, that carried the specific tightness of people who had respected Cross and were not yet sure how to reorganize that respect in light of what they were learning. But there were also faces that looked at her with something she recognized from long experience, as the particular expression of people who have been waiting for something to be named, and are relieved that someone finally named it. She nodded to the people she passed and kept walking. Chief Holloway fell into step beside her without announcement. "Morning's rough," he said quietly. "How rough?" "Manageable." Marlowe addressed the unit at 0630. Short, clear, honest told them what he was authorized to say, which wasn't much, but said it straight. No spin, no institutional language. He paused. "They responded well. Better than I expected." "They're good operators," Elena said. "They are." He walked beside her in silence for a moment. "2 of Cross's senior operators came to me last night, off the record. Wanted to know if they'd missed something they should have caught." She slowed slightly. "What did you tell them?" "I told them that the thing that was buried here was buried by people with 20 years of practice burying things, and that their not seeing it was not a failure of professional competence." He paused. "I told them the right response to discovering that someone above you made a catastrophic moral failure is not guilt. It's the decision about what kind of officer you're going to be going forward." Elena was quiet for a moment. "That's exactly right," she said. "I've been doing this a long time," Holloway said simply. "I know what people need to hear after something like this. I've heard it wrong enough times to know how to do it right." They reached the junction where their paths diverged, her toward the East Wing, him toward the equipment room, the ordinary geography of a morning that was also not ordinary at all. "Chief Holloway," she said. He stopped. "You made this possible," she said. "Not just the practical things, the information, the access. You made it possible in the other way. The way where someone new walks into a closed institution and needs one person to decide without being asked and without being given a reason that she's worth trusting." She held his gaze. "You decided that on day 10, I noticed." Holloway looked at her for a long moment. "I recognize the pattern," he said finally. "Someone carrying something big and carrying it alone. I've seen it before. Usually it ends badly." He paused. "I thought you might be the exception." "Was I?" He allowed himself something that was almost a smile. "Jury's still out," he said. "But it's looking favorable." He walked away. She watched him go and felt something settle in her chest. Not resolution, not quite, but the precursor to it. The sense of a weight beginning to redistribute itself across a broader structure so that no single point had to carry it all. Whitfield found her at 0900 with the expression Elena had learned to read as significant news delivered at a controlled pace. "The 2 additional mission records," Whitfield said, closing the door behind her. Elena waited. Operation Cobalt Reach, 18 months after Nightfall Echo, a reconnaissance extraction that resulted in 2 operators wounded and 1 missing in action, subsequently declared deceased. The post-mission review attributed the outcome to real-time intelligence failure, degraded communication assets, incomplete threat picture. Whitfield's voice was even and deliberate. "The pre-mission intelligence archive shows a threat assessment received and routed to a non-priority holding file 48 hours before deployment. Cross's access credentials on the reroute authorization." Elena closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, then opened them. "And the second," she said. Operation Trident Shore, 14 months after Cobalt Reach, a direct action mission against a high-value target that was aborted mid-execution after an operator took fire from a position that should have been cleared based on available intelligence. The operator survived. The intelligence that would have flagged the position existed in a holding file that was never accessed by the operational command. Whitfield paused. Same mechanism, same authorization trail. 3 missions. 3 separate instances of intelligence being deliberately withheld from operators in the field. 1 confirmed dead in Nightfall Echo. 1 missing and declared deceased after Cobalt Reach. 1 wounded in Trident Shore. 6 people, Elena said. Minimum, Whitfield said. The Cobalt Reach casualty had a family. The Trident Shore operator lost partial function in his left hand. He was medically separated 8 months later. She paused. "There may be others we haven't identified yet. The investigation is expanding." Elena sat with this. The expansion of the picture was not surprising. She had been bracing for it since Whitfield mentioned the additional instances the previous evening. But bracing for something and receiving it were different experiences, and she gave herself the internal space to register the difference honestly. Cross had not made a catastrophic one-time mistake under pressure. He had built a practice. He had used the intelligence routing mechanism deliberately repeatedly across multiple missions and multiple years. And the practice had cost people their lives and their bodies and their careers in ways that he had apparently been able to sustain alongside his identity as an excellent instructor, a decorated officer, a man his operators believed in. That was the thing. She still couldn't fully reach the interior arithmetic of a person who could hold both of those things simultaneously. She had tried in the corridor after their mess hall conversation, and she had tried again last night, and she still couldn't find the inside of it. "Does he know about the scope?" she said. "We informed him this morning," Whitfield said. His response was to ask for a moment alone, and then to ask for his attorney. She paused. Before the attorney request, he said one thing. He said, "Tell Commander Voss that I'm sorry I made her carry it this long." The workspace was very quiet. Elena looked at the wall for a moment. "That's not an apology," she said carefully. "No," Whitfield agreed. "It's an acknowledgement. There's a difference." Did he understand the difference? Whitfield considered. "I think he understands a great many things now that he wished he'd understood a long time ago." She paused. "What you said that people aren't one thing I've been thinking about that since yesterday. In 15 years of investigations, I've processed a lot of people who did terrible things. The ones who are purely terrible are actually the easy ones. They don't require you to hold 2 contradictory facts simultaneously." She looked at Elena directly. "Cross is not the easy kind." "No," Elena said. "He isn't." "How do you hold that?" Elena thought about it honestly because Whitfield was asking honestly, and she deserved an honest answer. "I hold the 4 names," she said. "That's what I hold. The rest of the complexity about Cross is real, and I don't dismiss it. But when the weight of it gets difficult to organize, I go back to the 4 names. They're not complicated. They were people who showed up and did their jobs and trusted the institution above them to give them what they needed to come home. That trust was violated. The complexity of the person who violated it doesn't change what the violation cost. Whitfield was quiet for a moment. You've had 3 years to find that answer. I've had 3 years to need it, Elena said. The rest of Thursday moved quickly in the way that days move when they contain too much for any single moment to dominate. Torres gave his full recorded statement. At 1100, 7 hours of documented account, delivered with the exhausted precision of someone who had been rehearsing this testimony in private for 8 years. Okafor briefed Elena on the key points. At 1400, Torres had confirmed every element of the original case, plus provided the connecting tissue for both additional missions. His personal records cross-referenced against the archive materials and the mission timelines, produced an evidence chain that Whitfield described as airtight in a way that left no ambiguity about either the mechanism or the intent. Cross's authorization. Torres's physical handling. 3 missions. 6 casualties. The case was complete. Marlowe submitted his formal statement at 1500, and what he delivered was something Elena had not fully anticipated. Not just corroboration of what she had found, but a history of his own tenure at Red Harbor that included 3 specific moments where he had noticed anomalies in the intelligence reporting culture and had not known what to do with what he noticed. He had not been involved in any concealment, but he had been present in an institution where concealment had been practiced, and his statement confronted that directly and without self-protection, which took a kind of courage that she recognized and respected. At 16:30, Whitfield's team formally transmitted the complete evidence package to the Naval Special Warfare Inspector General, the Judge Advocate General's Office, and the Pacific Command Review Board simultaneously. The simultaneous transmission was a deliberate structural choice. It prevented any single institutional node from sitting on the information before it reached the others, which was exactly the kind of routing vulnerability that had allowed Nightfall Echo to stay buried for 8 years. Elena had suggested the simultaneous transmission. Whitfield had implemented it without hesitation. Carver found her in the observation wing at 1700, watching the last training session of the day wind down below. The operators were moving through a cool-down sequence under a senior petty officer who was running them with calm authority, not Cross's particular style, but competent and steady, the kind of instruction that would continue to function regardless of what was happening in the command structure above it. Carver sat beside her, and they watched together for a while without speaking. "It's really over," he said finally. "The Red Harbor part of it," she said. "The rest of it takes longer." "How much longer?" "Months for the formal proceedings. Longer for the other investigations. The recognition board for Nightfall Echo is in 6 weeks." She paused. "These things have their own timelines. You learn to stop trying to control them and just make sure you show up when they need you." He nodded. "What happens to Torres?" "That's the review board's determination," she said. "He cooperated fully and voluntarily. He documented his own culpability and preserved that documentation for 8 years at considerable personal risk. His attorney will argue those factors. They're real factors." She paused. "I won't advocate for a specific outcome. That's not my place. But I won't advocate against him either." "Cross," he said. "Court-martial," she said. "Based on the scope of what Whitfield found, it's unavoidable and appropriate." She was quiet for a moment. "He'll lose everything he built. The career, the rank, the identity he constructed around being exceptional at this job." She paused. "He was exceptional at this job. That's the part that doesn't resolve cleanly. It just exists alongside everything else." Carver looked at the training floor. "The operators down there, some of them trained under him for years." "Yes." "What do they do with that?" "They keep what was genuinely good," Elena said. "The skills, the methodology, the standards he held them to that were real. And they learn that the person who taught them those things was also capable of a profound betrayal. And they integrate both of those facts into their understanding of what they are and what they're trying to become." She paused. "It's not a comfortable lesson, but it's an honest one, and honest lessons tend to produce better operators than comfortable ones." Carver was quiet for a long time. "I want to be like you when I've been in this as long as you have," he said. It came out simply without calculation, the way genuine things tend to come out when someone stops editing themselves. She looked at him. "No, you don't," she said, not unkindly. "You want to be as clear-eyed and as committed to the truth. You don't want the 3 years it took to get there, or the thing that made them necessary." She held his gaze. "Become someone who doesn't need an 8-year injustice to develop that clarity. Become someone who finds it earlier and holds it longer and uses it proactively." She paused. "That's considerably better than what I am." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm going to think about that for a very long time," he said. "Good," she said. "That's the appropriate response." The twist she hadn't seen coming arrived at 1900 in the form of a secure message from her contact at Naval Special Operations Command that contained a name she had not encountered anywhere in 3 years of investigation. The message was brief. During the review of Torres's personal records, a secondary communication thread had been identified, a series of encrypted messages between Torres and an undisclosed third party during the Nightfall Echo period. The messages had been embedded in the logistics records in a way that Torres himself had not flagged in his testimony, which suggested either that he hadn't known they were there or that he had chosen not to surface them. The messages were still being decrypted. But the access signature on the encryption key belonged to an officer who had not appeared in any thread of the investigation until now. Rear Admiral James Harker, Pacific Command Operations Director. Current position, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Special Warfare. Elena read the name twice. Then she read it a third time. She sat back in her chair and thought about the architecture of what she was looking at. If Harker was in the communication thread, he was not peripheral to the concealment mechanism, he was above it. Cross and Torres had been the operational layer, the people who handled the physical movement of information. But someone with Harker's position and access would have been the reason the mechanism existed in the first place. The person who created the tool and trusted Cross to use it, which meant the investigation was not moving toward a conclusion. It was moving toward a much larger center. She sent a single message back. Received. Standing by. Do not approach Harker without full evidence package. Build it first. Then she sat very still for several minutes and thought about what this meant for the 6 casualties she already knew about, and the unknown number she didn't, and what it meant that the pattern had potentially been directed from 2 levels higher than anyone at Red Harbor, and what it meant that the institution she had spent her career serving had harbored this particular architecture of betrayal at a level of seniority that she was still processing. She thought about Daniel Park again. She thought about all 4 of them. She had come here believing she was closing something. She was now standing at the edge of something she hadn't known existed, and the choice in front of her was exactly as clear as every other choice she had made since the night Nightfall Echo ended. She picked up her phone and called Whitfield directly. Whitfield answered on the second ring. "You've seen the message," Elena said. 30 seconds ago, Whitfield said. Her voice was controlled and precise, and underneath both of those things was the tightly managed energy of someone who had just watched the scope of their investigation double in a single moment. "Harker." "Yes. This goes above my authorization level." "I know," Elena said. "You need to go above it tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." A brief pause. "Agreed." Another pause. "Commander Voss, are you prepared for what this becomes if Harker is what the evidence suggests?" "I've been prepared for 3 years," Elena said. "I didn't know the full shape of it, but I've been prepared." "This could take years more," Whitfield said. "The investigation, the proceedings, the full institutional reckoning. Years." "Then I'll be available for years," Elena said. That was always the answer. Whitfield was quiet for a moment. "I'll make the calls tonight," she said. "Stay close." "I'm not going anywhere," Elena said. She ended the call and sat in the quiet of the workspace and felt the particular sensation of a mission that had arrived at a conclusion that was also a beginning. The specific vertiginous clarity of discovering that the truth you pursued was larger than the container you built for it, and that the right response to that discovery was not to step back from the additional size of it, but to expand your own capacity to carry it. She had done that before. She could do it again. Friday morning. The The last full day before Whitfield's team would begin the transition to the expanded investigation, Elena asked for 1 hour. Just 1 hour. She went to the main range. She asked the armorer on duty, a young petty officer who had heard enough about her by now, to simply hand her what she asked for, without ceremony, for the evaluation. Sidearm, the same weapon she had fired on the afternoon Cross had called her forward to embarrass her. The petty officer set it on the counter and stepped back and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to do. She loaded the weapon. She walked to the firing line. She stood at the same position she had stood 3 weeks ago, with the same calm and the same settled grip and the same exhale before the first round. She fired 12 rounds. The range was otherwise empty. The sound of each shot was clean and complete and went nowhere except forward. She retrieved the target. The grouping was identical to the one 3 weeks ago. 12 rounds. Perfect. She stood with the target in her hand for a moment. She was not doing this to prove anything. There was no one watching. There was no point being made. She was doing it because she needed to complete a circle to stand in the same place where this had begun, and let the 3 weeks between that afternoon and this one exist in their full dimension, in the specific intimacy of a person, taking account of what has happened, and what it has cost, and what it has produced. She set the target down. She unloaded the weapon, cleared the chamber, set it on the counter. She walked out of the range. Carver was waiting for her outside, which she had not expected. He held 2 cups of coffee. Good coffee. He had clearly stopped at the officer mess, rather than the equipment break room, which meant he had put actual thought into this. She took the cup. "How did you know I was at the range?" she said. "Armorer told me," he said. "We've been talking more since all of this started." He fell into step beside her. "I wanted to ask you something before you leave." "Ask," she said. "The new assignment you're going to receive, whatever comes after this, is it going to take you somewhere you can do this kind of work? The real kind, not evaluation programs." He paused. "The kind of work that actually matters." She considered the question honestly. "There's a position that's been offered," she said. "I haven't formally accepted it yet. It's focused on intelligence oversight within Special Operations Commands, specifically building the structural safeguards that should have prevented Nightfall Echo from happening in the first place." She paused. "Early detection systems. Routing verification protocols. The kind of institutional architecture that makes it significantly harder for one person to bury a critical piece of information, and significantly easier for the people downstream to know when something has gone wrong." Carver was quiet for a moment. "So instead of finding the betrayal after it happens, making the betrayal considerably more difficult to execute in the first place," she finished. "Yes. That's bigger than what you did here," he said. "It's different from what I did here," she said. "What I did here was necessary. What comes next is also necessary, and it reaches further. But it requires a different kind of patience." She paused. "I think I'm ready for it." He nodded slowly. They walked in companionable silence for a moment. "Lieutenant Carver," she said. "Commander Voss. The evaluation report. Your performance over the past 3 weeks. Your judgment, your discretion, your willingness to carry weight you weren't required to carry and carry it well." She paused. "I'm going to recommend you for the Intelligence Coordination Cross-Training Program. Not because you did me a favor. Because you demonstrated the specific combination of instinct and discipline that program exists to find and develop." She looked at him. "You should know what I'm recommending and why, so you can decide whether you want it." He stopped walking. She stopped too, and turned to look at him. His face had the expression of someone receiving something large that they are only partially equipped to process in real time, which was the appropriate response. "Yes," he said. "I want it." "Good," she said. She started walking again. He caught up. "Can I ask one more thing?" he said. "One. Why did you stay quiet all the way through? Why didn't you tell anyone who you were, what you'd done, what your record was? It would have made it easier from the beginning." She thought about it for a moment, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wanted to give him the precise answer rather than the simple one. "Because the case had to stand without me," she said finally. "If I had walked in and announced my record and used it to open doors and create authority for myself, Everything I found would have been filtered through the question of what I was trying to prove. Every piece of evidence would have been examined for personal motivation rather than examined on its own merits. She paused. I needed the investigation to be clean. That meant I had to be invisible long enough for it to build itself into something that didn't need me to defend it. She looked at him. The evidence doesn't care who found it. A clean chain of custody doesn't require an impressive biography. The truth stands on its own, or it doesn't stand. He absorbed this. The quiet was the work, he said slowly. The quiet was always the work, she said. She left Red Harbor on a Saturday morning, the same day of the week she had arrived, though everything else about the leaving was different from the arriving. She had the same one small bag. She had the same plain uniform. But the base that watched her go was not the base that had watched her arrive, and she was not the same woman who had signed in before the duty officer's first cup of coffee 4 weeks ago. Marlowe walked her to the gate. Howe was quiet for most of the walk, which she appreciated. He was a man who understood the value of silence, which made him, in her experience, considerably more trustworthy than men who felt compelled to fill it. At the gate he stopped. What do I tell them? He said. The operators. When they ask about you, and they already are, what do I tell them? Elena thought about it. Tell them the truth, she said. All of it. What she was looking for, what she found, what it cost the people she was looking for it on behalf of. She paused. And tell them that the lesson isn't about her. The lesson is about what they choose to do with it. He nodded. One more thing, he said. The Nightfall Echo Recognition Board in 6 weeks. Will you? I'll be there, she said. I'll say every name out loud in a room that's built to hold them. I'll make sure those 4 people get the record they were owed 8 years ago. She met his gaze. That's the one thing I never doubted I would finish. He extended his hand. She shook it. She walked through the gate. Behind her she heard Red Harbor, resuming its morning rhythm. The count of a conditioning exercise, the voice of an instructor. The controlled and purposeful noise of people doing difficult things well. Inside an institution that was imperfectly, and at great cost, beginning the long work of becoming worthy of them. She didn't look back. She had never needed to see where she'd been to know exactly where she was going. 6 weeks later, in a formal hearing room at Naval Special Operations Command. Elena Voss stood at a podium and spoke 4 names into the official record with the full clarity and the full weight they had always deserved. She spoke them without rushing and without hesitation, and every person in that room heard each one and understood what each one represented. Daniel Park, Marcus Webb, Alicia Torres, Kevin Ray. The room held all of it, and the quiet woman who had carried those names across 3 years and 400 miles and 1 month at a base where nobody knew who she was, finally set them down, not in loss, but in completion. Not in ending, but in the particular beginning that only arrives when the truth has finally been delivered to the people and the places and the record where it was always supposed to live. She had not needed them to respect her past. She had only needed them to see the truth. And the truth in the end was exactly as large and as unignorable and as fully itself as she had always known it was. That was enough. That had always been enough.